Hello, I'm Linda Ann Smith, video creator for ColourArte.com. Today I'll paint roses with Twinkling H2O's. Choose the colors you're going to use and spritz them with water at least 5 minutes before you start to paint. I'll be using Pear Blossom, Spanish Moss, Rainforest, Dreamsicle, Fuzzy Peach, and Watermelon Mist. Because I chose colors that were related to pink or red colors and green colors, I'm also going to use those colors to sketch with. I find that watercolor pencils or colored pencils, it's easier to hide than just a regular lead color. I tried to adjust the settings on my camera so you can see my sketching, but the important thing is I sketch very lightly, but I can see it to use as guidelines later. You don't have to sketch every detail, just the guidelines that you're going to need. You'll need to tape your sketch down to a flat surface and try to be sure that you smooth out any air bubbles that could be behind it, and burnish the edges of your tape so that it stays nice and flat. This is 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, but it will buckle if it gets enough water on it. It looks like I had a little residue of red left over in my brush that I didn't clean very well, but that's not going to hurt anything. Although I am going around the blossoms right now into the areas that are going to be green. After I cleaned up my brush here, I'm doing it with plain water. I'll begin with a wash of my lightest green color, which is Pear Blossom, and I'm just going to mix that up in a real juicy brush, and I will just dot it into the wet areas until I have a nice balance of color. I'll mix the leftover Pear Blossom with Rainforest, and those will definitely relate then. And I get a nice juicy brush and just let these colors bleed together, wet into wet. Drag it where you think you want it, but don't try to force it. Watercolor is at its best when you let it do its own thing. I use my heat gun to further move the color and also to help dry the paint. You can adjust the paint with a brush as you go along. This is a new roll of tape, and apparently it's not going to act like the other roll did because it's starting to loosen from the table, and I end up having to retape the whole thing later. I'm sure it was the heat gun that did this, but on the twin roll that I got with it, this didn't happen. Just one of those things that you have to cope with. I try to continue painting and add Spanish moss so that I can get some variety of color into my painting. I let those colors completely dry while I carefully try to stretch everything back without touching the paper surface too much where the paint is, and I double tape it down to the table again and begin my pinkish colors. I brushed a thin wash of fuzzy peach into the rose areas, those two areas, and now I'm getting ready to use my Dreamsicle on top of that because it's getting close to dry. But first I decide I want to use some salt between the two big blossoms. That'll give it more texture and draw your eye to that area later. Because that green area was so wet, the salt will also help soak up some of the water. I'm mixing my Dreamsicle color. You can see both of the colors, Dreamsicle and Fuzzy Peach there. The Dreamsicle will look brighter than the Fuzzy Peach on the paper, and begin to put in some details. If you've never painted a rose before or studied the shapes of what the petals look like when they come together, this would be a good time to have a reference, some kind of photo to refer to get the shapes into these blossoms correctly. Now it's time to add a layer of watermelon mist, and sometimes I paint into the wet and sometimes I paint it into the dry areas. I continue to paint and adjust until it looks right to my eye. At times I'm painting wet into wet, at times wet into dry, and other times just kind of using my brush to kind of force it and push it together in areas. Once I start painting the other rose, I'm sure that I'll be coming back to this one to make some adjustments from time to time. For the second rose, I'm mixing Dreamsicle with some of the other paint that I had left over, some of the watermelon mist, and I'll start filling in the petals the same way that I did on the first rose. But I don't want them to look exactly alike. I want one of them to look like it's tilted a little bit, so the center of it will be a little more to the side than the center of the first rose that I painted. I'm wetting the edges and some of the inside of the rose with just plain water. And softening the edges of some of the paint that I've already put down. Pop often and lean away from my painting to get a different perspective so that I can see what I need to go where. The edges of the first rose are dry enough to soften now, and I just do that with a little bit of water. And a tiny bit of paint here and there. I'm ready to put in some smaller roses now. I'll put a small rose right up here. And with the two larger flowers, I already have my center of interest, so I'm not going to define these greatly. I'm just going to put in some dabs of paint here and there to represent rosebuds. Make this area a little bit softer by adding some water and then dabbing it with a tissue to pick up that water and some of the pigment. I feel like by scattering these little buds around, it looks less stiff and more natural, more comfortable. Another layer of paint here will add some depth and shadows to the rose. Finally, I mixed just a tiny bit of the rainforest with some of the pinkish colors to give some more depth, but use that sparingly. Add a few thin lines to suggest veins and stems, and you're finished. Everything's completely dry, just wipe away the salt with your fingers. If you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up and comment, share, and subscribe to my channel and to ColourArte's channel. I'll list all the links below and all the supplies that I used down in the description box. Thank you so much for watching.